There we are. Okay, we are live, and this is Sales Chats. This is John Golden. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Pipeliner CRM and also Executive Editor of SalesPOP, online sales magazine. That's salespop.pipelinersales.com. I'm coming to you today for a change. I'm actually on the East Coast. I'm in Palm Beach, Florida. Normally, I'm coming to you out of Carlsbad, California on the West Coast. This time, I'm on the East Coast. And we have our special guest today, Marylou Tyler, who's in Boston, but normally is in Boise. So we're all over the place.
Des Moines, Iowa.
Des Moines, Iowa. Okay, I'm just kidding. Well, I'm not. I've only been in America 20 years, so I can still use that as an excuse for getting all the Midwestern states mixed up. And for a little consistency, we have Martha, who is in Vienna, Austria, as usual. Hey, Martha.
Hi.
So just before we start, let me give you the process and how this works. So we have the guest, which today is Marylou Tyler. We have one subject, which today is sales process. And, that's a very pertinent subject for everyone. And then we're just going to have a conversation, ask Marylou some questions. She's going to talk us through this. If you want to join in on Twitter, it's #SalesChats. That's #SalesChats. Martha monitors the Twitter feed. If there's anything that comes up, she will interrupt us if there's something pertinent, question or comment. Otherwise, we feel free for you guys to get engaged and answer these questions yourself and get involved in the conversation. This is all completely interactive. Okay, well, with that, I'd like to introduce Marylou Tyler. Marylou is a renowned sales process improvement expert. She is a well-known author, speaker, and she's CEO of Strategic Pipeline. She's helped businesses like Apple, Bose, UPS grow their revenue by increasing their sales pipelines. And she really has a passion for helping B2B sales professionals go from cold conversations to qualified opportunities. So welcome, Marylou.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about one of your favorite subjects today, which is sales process, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And just before we were coming on air, I was asking Marylou about are there still many organizations that she deals with who either don't understand or don't have sales processes, and we were talking about that. So maybe we just start with just a simple baseline question. Why is a defined sales process important? Because let's face it, there are organizations who still try to operate without a defined one.
Mm-hmm. The main thing is if you're trying to get predictability and consistency, or you're looking to scale, it's really important that you have some defined metrics that are meaningful and actionable in nature so that you're able to predict what it'll take to get to the revenue goals and objectives that you've set for the company.
Good. So when you sit down with an organization, when you first start a process of helping them define their sales process, what are some of the first steps you take, or what do you look for?
Well, I like to use predictive analytics and the methods and teachings within that. So we break down the pipeline and the process actually into 7 steps. Mm-hmm. And the first step being to look at and plan and assess where we are. So I take that assessment and I look at 3 different buckets for that. The first is descriptively where people are today, what the pipeline looks like today. So we gather a bunch of data. We look in nooks and crannies and repositories to pull whatever data that we have. And then we look from there, we look out into the future of where we're trying to go and what we'd like to accomplish. And then the third bucket is, okay, realistically, let's dial it all back in now and look at where we are by leveraging people, process, and technology and see what we have in place today to get us to our goal and what we need to add. So it keeps everything pretty methodical, reduces our stress because we've outlined everything. And there's a system and a method that we go down looking at what I call the effective, we're trying to really maximize return on effort. So we look at effort versus what we're going to get from that effort.
So do you get a lot of resistance from salespeople, and do you have to almost sell them on the idea of sales process? Because traditionally, or certainly going back a while, everybody agreed, well, yes, accounting needs processes. Everybody else in the organization needs processes. But let's face it, salespeople are more, it's an art. They're more free form. You don't really want to shackle them. So process was kind of looked on as a dirty word by salespeople. So how do you get over that piece, and how do you sell them on the benefit?
Since I specialize in top of funnel, there is more of an acceptance around the fact that we are working with a larger number of records to begin with.
Right.
So we're, because there's so many methods and our sampling size is so large, there's more of a buy-in from that cold or first or even follow-up conversation to the opportunity to put a process in place. Where it gets a little muddy and what you're talking about is once we get to opportunity, we have a relationship started, getting from opportunity to closed is typically the area that I hear a lot people saying every client's different and every sale is different. And, if you really look at that, inside of that difference and that chaos, there's probably a system in there if you're willing to look at it. So I don't even work with clients who aren't willing to look and willing
Right.
to explore. Life's too short, everybody, to do. So I don't want to argue with you or fight with you, because you have to at least meet me halfway to get started. And that is that even in chaos, there's a system and a process that we can probably identify and map out.
Yeah, that's very true. I have a Carl Jung quote somewhere that I used in a book, and I think it was like in all chaos there is order, or something, or all disorder there is something like that. I can't off the top of my head, but I agree 100% with you. Okay, so what are some of the most important performance indicators when it comes to a sales process? What do you look for?
Well, I look for things that are within the stage, which I call intrastage, and then I look at movement from stage to stage, which is interstage. So if we think of a pipeline, let's think of an oil pipeline. It's a moving thing. The oil within the pipeline is not sitting. So we have to look at movement, and movement is really important. Intrastage movement is movement that allows us to move to that next mile marker and learn something new that we didn't know before. We had either a conversation or email or direct mail piece, whatever we used to communicate. We got a response back that allowed us to move that one marker forward.
Right.
So I look for metrics and I look for those types of analytics to put into place both inter and intra stage in order to be able to start tracking where we are and let the data tell us. As long as it's statistically relevant, meaning we have a good sampling size of records running through the pipeline, we can get a pretty good idea of what our unique benchmarks are. And there are also benchmarks we can compare industry-wide to see where we are relative to those benchmarks.
Yeah, and that's the concept of movement, I think, is really interesting, because I know from experience, and when I worked with when I ran Huthwaite, and we did a lot of consulting with companies on sales and sales methodology, and it's amazing how many salespeople and even sales managers can sort of believe there's movement in a sale when there absolutely isn't, right? When there's say the prospect isn't doing anything. You've arranged a meeting for 2 weeks' time, but there's nothing happening in between on behalf of the prospect. It's you doing all the work, right?
Right.
And they believe that that's movement. And you're like, well, it actually really isn't movement. All you have is another meeting. We used to call it a continuation. So do you think, is that one of the things that you really help people understand, the concept of what real movement constitutes?
Yes, it's a big part. Now, in the older book, Predictable Revenue, there's a formula on page 42 that is predictable revenue equals the actual pipeline itself with the metrics, plus the average deal size, and then also time is in there. So that lag factor is really something I hit pretty hard on
Right.
with my clients, because if days in queue is too long, or if it's just spinning its wheels inside of a stage, that you cannot generate a predictable revenue formula from that. So we really chunk that down and look to see the why behind the stagnation and work on understanding whether it's a skills issue that's causing it to stagnate, whether, it's not the right fit of an account. So we really take a look at that and analyze each one that's meaningful for us, that fits our ideal account profile, and come up with a plan of how to create movement in those particular streams. Because we could be servicing multiple types of accounts with segmentation. So we do one for each tier, if you will.
Right. So that's you mentioned stagnation. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the signs of stagnation in a process? I mean, there's obviously the obvious ones, when they just haven't moved. But what are some other signs of stagnation, and what are some of the things you can do to remediate that or spot it early, even better?
Well, I call it hopeful prospecting or hope prospecting, when there's a lot of activity, but nothing's happening. So I know pretty much all the tricks that sales reps can pull on me. I've been doing this for 30 years now, and I used to run a call center where they put the guys would put phone numbers taped to the bottom of their desk so that they can get to their dial number by just pulling out those 20 dials that they needed to do. So I'm pretty sharp about looking for stuff like that. And I really, because we have so few conversations that we need to move each day, I like to look at that smaller subset and really dive into what happened on that conversation. And if we can't move that needle a little bit forward, then I look to see what is causing so much activity but no movement. And then we start building, basically, with the system's help, we start building the kind of watchdogs along the reporting and dashboard to help us see where things are getting stuck and who's getting them stuck and what is causing them to be stuck.
So can you just give examples? What are some common ones that you've come across, maybe common mistakes that salespeople make that lead to stagnation, and maybe even more so lead to not recognizing the stagnation?
Well, death by task is one. They set a lot of tasks for future events, and then those events get moved a lot. They just keep shifting, and there's no conversation. I'm looking for meaningful conversations. And if I see a lot of dials, if I see a lot of emails with no responses coming back, if it, like you said, if it's a one-sided conversation, then that's not good. So I have built-in benchmarks that only allow so many conversations before it's flagged as, what the heck is going on here with this record? So I put thresholds on everything so that we can make sure that we understand if we have a skills issue or if we have an account issue, because we don't know with stagnation whether it's that our reps aren't trained in the sales conversations, they don't understand the why change, why now, why us sales conversation, or if it's really that these accounts that are running through this pipeline are not qualified and not the ideal. So we have to look at all areas, the accounts, leads, we have to look at the actual skill sets of the reps. So all of those markers are on my big checklist of things to look for stagnation.
Excellent. So here's another question. You mentioned you do a lot of work at the top of the funnel, right? And a number of years back, I co-wrote a white paper with somebody on what we call the feel-good funnel, right? And that's where you pack tons of stuff into the early stages of your pipeline, and which allows you to sort of say to yourself, yeah, I realize revenue is not good right now, but just look at how much stuff is in the pipeline. So in 2 months' time, we're going to be on top of the world, right? And then in 2 months' time, you're saying the same thing again. So it's that kind of idea of packing stuff in the early stages to make yourself feel good. So you mentioned something just a moment ago about really good qualifying about what goes into your pipeline. So what and I think a lot of people miss that. So what advice do you have to people on quality versus quantity into the early stages, and how do you execute that?
I like to work it backwards. So I like to understand what the revenue objectives are for the client. And then based on that, I have them just describe what kinds of clients make up this revenue for you. And then we work to see if we can segment those records into buckets of maybe small, medium, and large, or high tier, low tier, or targeted accounts, extended universe, and everybody else. So I really work to try to get them to compartmentalize and segment without even looking at the list. Just don't even think about the list. Let's just look at the ideal world. And what do these clients look like? What's some demographic, firmographic, psychographic? What are these indicators? And then we work it backwards all the way up to the list. So then we look at the actual list health, the list fatigue, the list quality, and see what if we have records that describe distinctively the way they just described to me, those buckets and segments. We look at the list to see if the list makeup is the same.
I love that. That's a fantastic process. So because now you're taking the model of, okay, so here's your ideal target customer in whatever segments, whatever buckets, and then you're saying, okay, how does this fit that? It either does or it doesn't, right? It either does 100%, 75%, 50%, or it just plainly doesn't.
Yeah, and I have a lot of worksheets I use, and it's just mind-boggling how unhealthy some of the lists are that I work with. Even my co-author for the second book, Predictable Prospecting, had a list issue. He described Betty, who is this particular prospect that they knew they could close 60% of Bettys on a consistent basis. So, you know, we worked through what Betty looked like and the companies she worked for. And then we went into the list side of things. And so we looked in their house list and saw that there were 500 Bettys in there. Like, okay, great. And then we looked in LinkedIn and the same query parameters, we saw there were 50,000 potential Bettys. So there was a huge disconnect of what they had. So they were not only servicing only 500 Bettys, which are the whales, they had a ton of minnows and guppies in there. So that's what we're trying to do, is just get the whales, or, you know, in the tiers that we came up with, but don't fish with guppies when there's whales to be had. You know, that's the list in a nutshell. So yeah, so I have a lot of checks and balances for not only list quality, list quantity, but the makeup of the list, whether we're phone, email blend, or we're email only, or do we have 800 numbers versus direct dial? We look at all of that.
So what are, before we get on to talking about what makes for a really good sales process, and that is, tell me again a little bit about what are some common errors that companies make with the sales process? I mean, do sometimes like they try to document too much. It's like try and put in a 20-stage sales process, which is overkill, right? Or what are some of the common things that you see that people do that perhaps they shouldn't?
Well, some of this is the fault of some of the CRMs out there, in that the CRMs start really tracking at opportunity. So from first conversation or initial conversation to opportunity, there's just no process in place. So I have no idea. I mean, I had one client that drew a line between lead and opportunity. And it's like, well, what happens between those two stages? He's like, I don't know. You know, so it's like, that's one error, is that some of the software out there doesn't allow them to really think through what that first conversation looks like, and what are the stages that people go through, and that whole purchase intent gets lost, you know, up there. So that's one area. And the other one, like you said, they put way too many stages. So, you know, let's make it simple to start, keep it simple. And then as we get smarter and understand which metrics are actually actionable for us, our unique metrics, then we can add stages in. So I see that a lot, that there's vanity metrics, what I call vanity metrics, which absolutely mean nothing. It's like I throw those out immediately, and I want to put meaningful analytics in. So those areas, and then the list. The list is what we live and die by for a top of funnel. So those are the areas I look at. I look at over craziness on the stage definition, no stages. I look at also vanity metrics versus the quality metrics. And then we look at the list, and then that immediately dives us into persona development, ideal account profiles, our SWOT. It's all comes together when we work through that.
Yeah. No, I love what you just said about that, you know, lead process, like lead to opportunity and CRM, because, you know, obviously we're a CRM vendor, but that was one of the things that we built in, you know, the concept of multiple pipelines. So you actually can build a lead process with the stages and all of that
Yay.
kind of stuff before it ever goes into the
Yeah,
sales process, and then
that's good.
it goes into account management process. So it's all process driven. So I like what you said. I like
Yeah.
what you said there. Um, so with the companies you worked at, what have you seen that when you see somebody who's really gets this right and
Hmm.
really understands what you're talking about and puts it into action, what does a really great implementation of a sales process do for a company? And what have you, which kind of, without naming the companies, but where have you seen it being done really well?
Well, I have so many stories because I've been working at this for 30
Sure.
years now. So, but let me give you a couple. One was a small company that really didn't have any process in place, knew they needed to do something. So I went through my 7-point process, which basically is assessing where we are today. It's looking at the target of who we're trying to go after. Then we engage. So we work on our pieces of content assets. Then we look at analytics, we optimize, we systematize, and then we maintain. Those are the
Right.
7 steps. So, and those 7 steps we were able to do with this company in about 3 months, just to get them kind of moving along. I mean, it's like, don't worry, be crappy, that we fail forward, because we didn't have any metrics, we had nothing to go by. So we just sort of looked at the volume and really honed in on the records and the analytics. So they got it. At 3 months, we were sort of walking, maybe crawl to walk. And then 6 months, we were walk to run. And then they just took off and they went public. I mean, it was just a great story, a small startup that
Wow.
went public because they were able to really stay true to their process and not let the crap get in to the pipeline. They were really good about throwing away those records that were not high probability of closing, high likelihood, high revenue potential as well. I mean, it's just really, if you hone in on that and you stay true to that, then you're going to have a really robust pipeline that you can scale.
So how do you help sales managers or sales executives through that initial? There's always an initial period when you put in something new, say you implement a new sales process, and there's a curve, right? Things don't
Oh yeah.
normally like just take off immediately, and there's
No.
yeah, exactly. And with particularly because it's sales and because it's revenue and all of that, that there is less patience than perhaps, as I said, if you put in a new accounting system, maybe they'd be happy if it took 6 months or a year for it to really kick into gear, and they'd be okay with that. Sales, not so much, right? So,
Right.
how do you help sales management or sales executives or whatever through that process of when you're implementing and rolling out a new sales process, and to stick the stick with it factor? How do you encourage them to stick with it?
Well, it depends on the client and it depends on the culture of the company. I have one client right now, we could not put the sales process in for their seasoned reps. I mean, they're
Right.
brokers. They just, there's no way they were going to change the way they sell. So we looked for pilot, we looked for onboarding of the younger brokers that were coming in, and they were more susceptible or more desirable of having a process in place because they didn't have a good book of business yet. So we
Right.
pick our battles and we show proof within the analytics of where we're going. And because we've done that work up front of figuring out in our planning what we look like today, what we want to look like tomorrow, and what we have realistically with the people, process, and technology, when we show that actual triangle and show how it's moving, it's not difficult to get buy-in
Right.
from both management and the reps, because the reps, we have some clients that we leverage the technology stack. When they get better at the sales conversation, they get to add technology stack, which is going to lessen their effort and
Sure.
so maximize the return. So there's a lot of little carrots we put in along the way to get them to move from this sheer will to
Right.
determination to drive to habit. I mean, we're
Right.
trying to get them to habit. So when they wake up in the morning, it's like brushing your teeth. They know exactly what they need to do with the workflow, and they do it, and there's no complaining about it. But we
Right.
do have to move them through that behavior of sheer will is when we get started to habit, which
Right.
it's difficult.
Yeah.
Anything to change is difficult.
Sure, and I guess that's why obviously you define some leading indicators, so that, because everybody always says, so when I used to do sales consulting with Hathaway, it was always like, what do you want to get out of this? Well, we want revenue to increase, and you go, well, yes, okay, of course you do, but that's down the road. There's a lot of variables, and that's also a lagging indicator. Yeah, so you have to define some leading indicators to say, yes, you're on the road there.
Yeah, and because everything I do is all based in data and analytics, I can't even think otherwise, because that's who I am as an engineer. I'm just, so I don't know how to operate without having the blueprint and having the before, during, after pictures, and constantly measuring it, analyzing it, making it better, iterating, having A/B split testing. I mean, that's my whole life. So it's just a natural.
So how do you, I mean, this is one kind of question based on that data. How do you help people nowadays? Because I always get the feeling that people are feeling a little overwhelmed by data, because suddenly, like, there's big data and, and artificial intelligence, and there's all this other stuff coming at you, and if you have this tool, it's going to tell you this, and this tool is going to tell you that. It's all this data. How do you, because you've been doing this a long time and you've always been data and analytics driven, so how do you help people sort of cut through the noise and say, these are the analytics and data that's actually important?
We actually go native. We go native with whatever the app is that they have, their CRM, and we look to see natively what the CRM can provide for us. And I measure that against my Fab 5 metrics that we all start with, that I feel are non-negotiable, that we have to start with those. And see where the CRM fits in that. And if we need to kind of bump it up a little bit by doing a little bit of programming underneath the covers, we'll do that. But it's not insurmountable. Most CRMs will track the inter and intra stage types of metrics that I'm looking for. And then, and only then, once we start getting some volume and getting some consistency in the network, then we start throwing technology or stack or more types of apps to help maximize return on effort. That's all we're looking for. But not all apps work for all companies.
Yeah.
It really depends on the workflow. I mean, I have one client who has 150 accounts that he can sell to, period. He doesn't need all these apps that give him all this stuff. He just needs his 150, make sure he's following up. He needs a good follow-up tool. And that's it. So
it'd be nice to have such a well-defined market sometimes, wouldn't it?
I mean, when I was in sales, I had 6 accounts with a $2 million quota. So I get it.
Okay, so the time is flowing, because this would be a really great, fascinating conversation. But what we like to do before we leave is to ask you, okay, personally, when you get up in the morning, what do you have a power tip to share with our listeners and viewers? How do you prepare yourself to be successful each day? Is there something you do? Is there a secret you want to share?
I stole this from the real estate people, and it's called First and 10. So when I get up in the morning, I check my email, and I try to reach out to 10 people in my first level networks to get connections to second and third level. And I was just teaching a class where we did this during class, and I almost quadrupled my network just in those 7 weeks that we had our class. So, that's a habit thing. I think really the biggest tip I can give you guys is try to get some of those tasks to habit stage, like my First and 10, where you reach out every morning. If you reach out to 10 people every morning times 22 business days times 12 months a year, your network's going to grow. So those kinds of little steps, baby steps, make a big difference.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love it. Okay, in the last couple of moments we have, would you like to tell people how they can get in touch with you, where they can find you, and to learn more about what you do?
Sure. I have a website, maryloutyler.com. I do a podcast once a week, so you can pop over there and listen to podcasts with colleagues. I do it with people who are top of funnel mostly. So we cover process and behavior. And you can also reach me on LinkedIn, Marylou Tyler.
Great. Well, listen, Marylou, this has been a fantastic conversation. Like I said, it's flown. I always know when these are really good and interesting conversations, because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we're running out of time. So thank you for that today. And thank you, Martha, in Vienna. Everything good? All ran smoothly?
All fine. Thank you.
Yay.
Good,
Thank you.
excellent. Okay, so thank you for those who joined us live today, and if you're watching this later, yeah, thank you for watching. You'll see this on SalesPOP, our online sales magazine, later on today, so or probably tomorrow when we have it up. So thanks again, Marylou, and we'll see you on another sales chat soon.
Great. Thank you for having me. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.